In this video, we'll talk about predicting Bitcoin's price movement and translating that into trading the crypto alt market. And this video really is prompted from a question I got from someone in the training. So I'll share that question, but I did think it would be helpful to share this on YouTube with other people because I think it's a question that a lot of people have, or just these series of things are challenges that people have when they trade the crypto market. So let's first start with a question, and then I'll jump into some exercises. I'm sure I'll jump into the charts, and we'll just dive in from there. And this question, I don't have permission to share the name, but here's the question. I'm trying to develop my own trading strategies. As you know, most alts move when BTC moves, and I find it hard to predict these movements in BTC because I can't see when BTC is about to move. I miss the move in alts. You have seen some of my analysis on some alts, and you've told me that I'm reading the markets right and that I should add some moving averages and compare it to BTC to find patterns. The problem is that I'm reading the markets in hindsight, so I may be able to interpret what has happened in the past, but I find it difficult to read what will happen next. So those are some good challenges. The first one is predicting BTC movements. The next one is translating that, like I said before, to trading the alt markets. And then the third thing I actually want to start with first, which is trying to figure out what happened in the past and then translating that to future movements. And if I'll just take a step back here and share, this is actually the biggest challenge that I think a lot of people have with trading, is that they look at the historical nature of the market. And most people, if you just take everything out, we're looking right now at the chart, we're looking at BTC, one-day Coinbase. And most people understand support and resistance. And most people will draw support and resistance lines and look at pivot points and look at rejection and look at follow through and breakouts and everything else from there. And the biggest challenge I see that people have when they start trading is understanding that the historical nature of anything that you trade is history. And the quote that really comes to mind, if you haven't heard this quote, is that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And if you haven't heard that quote, it just basically means that, yeah, history does mean the things that happen in history tend to, they don't repeat, but they follow maybe a pattern, or they're similar. And that's the best way to look at the markets. When you're looking at the markets, and I trade a lot of different markets, and I found it most helpful to understand that everything you see is historical, and that's the data that other traders, other systems, professional traders, non-professional traders, emotional traders, everybody under the sun that's interested in this instrument is using to look at the value of what they're buying or selling. So that they have that in mind. They understand that there's a historical knowledge there. But where things are going to go here, the right of the chart, if we just look here, where things are going to go here, the right of the chart, let me just remove some of this here. The right of the chart is, it's going to rhyme. It's not going to repeat. And a good way to explain this is, let me jump into the Bitcoin chart. And here's something I do when I'm actively trading alts, or I'm actively trading Bitcoin. If you're in the training or you've watched my videos, you know I use value channels. I use value channels because they work very well. And one of the recent videos that I shared is how to look at these supply and demand zones, like here on Bitcoin in the daily, and how to confirm when a supply and demand zone is holding up or when it's breaking out. That is a trading system, or a fundamental part of my trading system that I develop that gives me conviction to put on trades. And if I could start there, when you're developing a trading system, you're looking to develop a system that, yes, has been historically tested tested, but that gives you the confidence in real time to put on a trade of conviction. I don't put on a trade unless I have conviction. And then I don't take that trade off unless I have a conviction that that trade has not gone in the direction or in the way that I expected. That's how I do high probability trades. So I can look at the chart here at real time in the 1 hour time frame. And if I put on a trade here, if I go short here or I go long here, I'm putting on a trade of conviction because I've developed a trade system that I believe in. And I'm kind of starting at this high level idea because if you're struggling at reading the right side of the chart here, and you're waffling between, do I go short or do I go long? Do I put on a position? Do I buy here? Do I sell here? If you're waffling between that, that means that you have not developed a trade system that has developed a level of conviction for you to stay in a trade, take a trade, no matter what anybody else is in the market doing, because you've developed a trade system that you believe in that has a high probability of success. So I develop a trade system that I trade with conviction that gives me a high probability of success. So just to start there, where I would start is the first thing is really focus on developing conviction. And I'll be doing more training videos on this, and there'll be more in the training. So like I said before, I'm in the mindset section of the training. So I'm doing a lot more of this, but then I'm inner working it with, okay, you have mindset, but then how do you correlate this to the technical analysis? So there's technical analysis, and then let's put mindset on top of it. So there's a lot more training videos to come on that. But now let's jump into the next part of this, which is predicting Bitcoin's price movement. And before we talk about some exercise you can do, there's a word prediction. And you'll read a lot of trading books, and a lot of traders say that you shouldn't predict the market. No one can predict the market. But it never did ring true to me because that's what you're trying to do. And I often found when I started having success with my trading is when I was predicting where price was going to go, where price was not going to go. So I think this prediction word is, if you read a lot of trading material or listen to other traders, they say you don't want to predict the market, develop a trade system and trade like a robot. And that's true. There is an aspect of that where you want to develop a trade system that gives you conviction and that controls your risk and has proper risk management in there. But there's an aspect of trading which is really prediction. That's what you're doing. You're putting on high probability trades that have a predictive nature. So the better that you can get at predicting where price action is going to go or where it shouldn't go, the better trader you will be. Now, one exercise that I found for Bitcoin that I think any trader that is looking to trade the alt crypto market or trading Bitcoin should do is predicting where price will go in Bitcoin. And here's how you do that. So this will depend on your schedule that you have, but there's a couple different ways to do this, which is, let's say that you have the ability to look at the Bitcoin chart 3 times a day. Meaning you can spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes of looking at and analyzing the Bitcoin chart 3 times a day. Now, what you want to do in those 3 times a day, and this is a good exercise that I think you should just go through. I still do this anyways. So this is something that I do just in any market that I trade, which is whatever time frame you trade. So for instance, we're looking at the daily here. Let me scroll in. So we're looking at BTC USD on Coinbase, and we're looking at the daily. Let me remove this 70% here. And the best way to do this is either use a spreadsheet. That's a really good way to do this. Or you can use a notebook. The reason why I like a spreadsheet or Google Docs is because that you can go back and historically look at this and see whether or not you were right and really test whether or not you're reading the market right. But here's the simple way to do this, which is 3 times a day. So this is my time of the day. It's 1:05 p.m. Let's say 1:05 p.m. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my technical analysis. My technical analysis involves value channels, moving averages, various other things that I talk about in my training, volume, price analysis, and everything else. What I want to do at this time is I want to say price will be at, let's say it's, one of the things is today is Friday, and it's Friday in August. So understanding that professional traders are probably out for the day. Most people have taken a early Friday to kind of go out for the weekend and everything else. So things can move now, but they're going to move on really thin volume. The order books for most things and most markets in this time frame is small, just because most of the professional traders, most people are heading out for the weekend. Things can still move, but they're going to move in probably thinner volume. But what you want to do here is put a time frame. Is say, okay, by 5 p.m., so end of day, even though Bitcoin trades 24 hours a day, but end of day, price will be, so it's trading right now at 64.95. And you can do this on the chart. I like to do this within a spreadsheet and say price will be here. We'll be closing between 6,700 and 6,600. So it's going to break this supply and demand zone, I'm saying, based on my technical analysis, this supply and demand zone that I have on my chart, and it's going to close in this range. So obviously, if you can say a specific number, then that's great. But I typically say start with ranges. So it's going to close between 6,600 and 6,700 by 4 p.m. That's my prediction. Now, there's another way that you can do this. You can also do this on an actual, you can do 2 predictions. You can say, well, based on everything I see within the chart, there appears to be a slight upside now here towards the middle of the afternoon. And I can see price moving, making one move to the upside, 3%, and closing in this range. So that's what you put in your prediction. The other thing that you can do is you can say, well, on a downside move, because you do want to always be looking at the market in 2 ways, and a downside move, I see the market closing maybe in this range here, right around 63 to 6,200 in a downside move. So I see support kicking in here, and then this is where it's going to close around 6,400. Now, the great thing about doing this prediction is that you can come back in a day or 2 days and see if you were right. So you don't have to come back, but I do suggest if you want to get good at predicting the price action of a market, is whatever time frame you can commit to is then come back and predict prices. So obviously, if a market closes over the weekend or closes for a couple days, then you might want to predict where maybe it might gap up or gap down. But on something like Bitcoin, it's open 24 hours a day. Understanding that the weekend volume is suspect. Weekend price movement, for me, just because of the thin order books on Bitcoin, especially during summer, is just suspect. So looking at, but still predicting that price action will make you a better trader. So if you're not doing this, this is something to do. This is something that you should be tracking and tracking how you're not tracking. You are tracking price, but you're tracking whether or not you're right or wrong. And then if you're wrong, you want to understand why you're wrong. If you're right, you want to understand why you're right. So either way, you want to understand how are you reading the market at that given time? How did you make that prediction? And is your trade system that you developed right or wrong? That's what you're looking to do. Now, the other way to do this is multiple time frames. So you could say the 4 hour now. I'm looking at the 4 hour, and I'm going to predict on the 4 hour. Now, if you know, I suggest that you look at all time frames. So usually what I'm doing, the way that I would do this, is that I would say I have 3 times a day that I'm going to reserve to do a price analysis. And those 3 times a day, what I'll do is I'll do my technical analysis, and then I will put a time frame, which is usually the next time that I'll check, And then I'll verify whether or not price was at that point, whether or not I was right or wrong, and whether or not I read the market right or wrong, and what I might put into my trade system to make that predictive ability of where price is going to end up better. The other thing that you can do, I think anybody can do at a cursory level. If you're trading, you have one time a day. You can spend 10 to 15 minutes one time a day. Look at Bitcoin. Where did it close yesterday? Predict where it's going to close tomorrow. And the other thing that you can do, and this is a more advanced way to do this, and this is where, look, to be a trader, it's hard. I'm not gonna mince words. It's hard to be a trader, but I believe anybody that's watching this has the ability and the skill to do it. You have to develop your own theory of the market. That's something not often talked about, which is that you have to develop a theory of the market that gives you conviction. It's unique to you. Every successful trader has a theory of the market, a theory of how the market works. Now, they might have learned this theory from other people, from people in history, from people that have studied the market for years, but they have a theory that they've adopted that gives them the conviction to trade. You need to do the same thing. So the next level of this that takes it up a notch is predict the low and the high and the open and the close. And so there, what you're doing, and this, I wouldn't start there because that's difficult for most people. But if you can get good at predicting from here the high of the day and the low of the day and the open and close consistently, doesn't that mean that you have a trade plan that you probably should start trading? Let's say for the next 7 days, you are consistently within a 1 or 2% range of predicting the high and predicting the low. If you're within a 1 or 2% range of predicting the high and the low, and Bitcoin moves 8 to 10% a day, that gives you a range to trade in. That's a kind of a simple example to look at it. But that's the other way you want to look at it, is how close were you? How close were you to that high and low? Now, as I look at the daily here, I think it's probably a little aggressive to say that it's going to close around 6,700. So as I look at the daily, as I did my technical analysis, a high trade or a high range for it to close at the end of the day today would be between 65 and 6,600. So to close this gap here on the daily, I could see it closing there. Closing in this range, not necessarily. I would move this up based on what I see here on the daily. Possibly closing in this range. I could see it closing right where it's at right now in 4 hours. Just maybe making a move up, getting rejected, and then closing back down here. I could see that happening here. That's how I would predict price action based on me watching Bitcoin for the amount of years I have watched it and trading it and everything else. That would be just my initial assessment. So the first exercise to go through, if you're not doing this now, is to pick specific times of the day and predict where price is going to be, a range of price. Put it into a spreadsheet. And then when that time comes, look at it and see if you're right or wrong. And you can create all fancy graphs in Excel and everything else and say, well, I'm right 70% of the time, or I'm wrong I'm right 30% of the time. Okay. Why am I making these decisions? Why am I saying that price is going to close here? What's telling me that? What empirical evidence am I using from the chart? Is it just a gut decision? Is it above moving averages? Of course, I could go into all the details here, but that would make this video 2 hours long. That's what you want to understand. Why am I making that predictive decision? Why was I wrong and why was I right? The next level to that is the high and low of the day and the open and close. You can even, I say day, just because the day is the best way to do that. You could pick the same thing with a range. You could say between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. You could look at this here on the 4 hour, for instance. And right now it's 1:16. And I could say, well, it's by 5 p.m. here is going to be the high. Here is going to be the high by 5 p.m. And then here's going to be the low. And then I can say, obviously, I'm going to do this in a spreadsheet, maybe not on the chart. And I'm going to say, here's where it's going to open, right? And then here's where it's going to close. So just in this range, I could say it's going to open here, or it's already opened, obviously, here. But then here's where it's going to close at the end of this time frame on the 4 hour time frame. It's going to close in this range around 5 p.m. in a couple hours, which is just one time frame. So that means it would have to retrace all the way down here and close down here. So a candle kind of like this, probably more like this candle here. So 3% move from here. So right here is where it's going to close. I'm just giving, I'm not, please don't take these examples as gospel predictions, because I'm just giving examples of how you would walk through this. I haven't looked at this in depth. I haven't done a lot of technical today or anything else. I'm just giving you how you would walk through this and how the exercises you would do to actually accomplish this. So that's the first thing I would suggest. The other thing that I find extremely helpful that I think a lot of people don't do in analyzing Bitcoin is you always look at the downside. Always look at the downside. And I find that Bitcoin likes to cause pain. It likes to make people very happy, but it also likes to cause a lot of pain. So whenever I look at price action, I look at where price is currently at. So this is where price is currently at on the daily. And I say a 12 to 20% move would cause extreme pain. So in the next day, if Bitcoin wanted to cause pain to the market and anxiety, it would move down 12%. And 12% just happens to be a really nice area where I think Bitcoin needs to test or wants to test, which is that 5,400 range. I think my kind of analysis and theory of Bitcoin at this given time, and I've shared this on Discord, is that Bitcoin wants to test the 5,400 level pretty bad. It wants to test this range right in here. And what I would like to see for me to remain bullish on Bitcoin in the near, when I say near, the 1 to 6 month period, is that a heavy rejection from that and a huge move to the upside from that range. But what I've been watching for in my theory of the market has been, as soon as it hit this day here, these couple days, I was saying, okay, Bitcoin's setting up to go into a range, and I shared this in Discord, go into a range, and then it's going to range trade for a while, which it has. It's range traded, and then it's going to set up a range where it can make a 12% move in one day to test the 5,400 mark. So when you're looking at current price action, that's my theory of the market. I've developed that. So I'm looking at price action through that lens because I've seen this play out time and time and time again in Bitcoin. And I'm saying, where does it need to end up on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday? Well, right now, from this angle here, or from today, a 15% move, which isn't unheard of in Bitcoin. It can do that because it can go down 15% and get rejected pretty hard, is right around that 5,400. So if it continues to trade in this range over the weekend, it's my theory for the downside move still holds up. So it's still not in a bullish trend. And I've been saying this for a while. Anything between 6,000 and 7,000 can't be trusted. The market's not going to trust it. So once it gets above 7 and an 8, then the market's going to start feeling a lot more bullish. Right now, the market has been, it's been rejected in this range quite a bit. A lot of false promises. So when I look at the downside, I'm always looking at the downside. Bitcoin likes to move 12 to 20%, sometimes in a day. And we can go back in the historical aspect of this and look at this here. We look at the daily here. See these moves here. This huge move here. This move here was a 20% move. That was obviously when a lot more people were in February, when people were still, there's a lot more interest in the market. And then this next day that had huge rejection is a 30% kind of movement. This is the type of day I'm looking for. These series of days right here. So these series of days. So when I'm looking to predict the movements of Bitcoin, is I'm always looking at the downside. I'm looking at upside as well, the upside moves. But I'm always looking at what is the likely downside move to put it into a range that's going to surprise the market. So I know this is well, part of this is I'm making this video for people in the training, so you'll get a lot of this as well. But when you look at this, where does Bitcoin need to end up? Can it end up right around 67, 6,800 to then make a move down? That's a 20% move to test that 53, 5,400 range? Yeah. So I can see Bitcoin over the next couple of days trading in a range, maybe making its way up here, making it above this supply and demand zone, maybe making a run for 7,000, getting rejected here at 7,000, trading in a range, and then at some point in time making a run to the downside. That's what I'm looking for price action. So every time I look at the chart from the daily, I'm looking at what does a 12 to 20% move look like? Where does it put it? And then having the chart prove to me that there's an upside. Now this video is already longer than I anticipated, as usual. Let's get into trading alts and how you translate this into trading alts. So I talked about predicting Bitcoin's price. If you can predict Bitcoin's price and you can look at it from a downside move, because when Bitcoin moves to the downside, alts get hammered. So that's a given if you've been trading in the alt market. When it moves to the downside, alts get hammered. So you want to always think of the downside. Always look for indications that Bitcoin is starting to make its move to the downside. Always look for indications of that. And the second that you see that, that's where you maybe want to get out of some thin positions, or you maybe want to exit some profits. It's not saying that you panic sell anything, because you have to look for the reaction in that alt. But you want to really always be mindful of Bitcoin making a downside move. When it's trading in a range, like here, the alts have rooms to run. If we look at here, LSK, this is where it's been trading in a range. See, it's been trading in a range here. And this has been the move since it's been trading in a range. Right here, this move, this 52% move here on LSK, which I did get an exit on today, this has been when Bitcoin has been trading in this range that we're looking at here, in this range here. So the alts have had room to move. When Bitcoin trades in the range, alts sometimes do move. They don't always move. When Bitcoin declines, the alts decline. When Bitcoin moves up, the alts sometimes decline as well, because people are getting out of the alts and taking profits. So it's really understanding. You have to get good at understanding where is Bitcoin at. So as we transition here to the alts, you have to get good at understanding, is Bitcoin in a range? Is it going to a range? When it hit here and then it went to this day here, okay, is it going to stay in this range? And it's traded in this range here. So when Bitcoin trades in a range, then the alts have room to move. If Bitcoin declines, the alts decline. So you have to get good at that predictive nature. And I shared how to do that. The next thing is that, and we go to LSK here, I'm going to rehash what I've covered a lot in the training and especially in the recent video, is that this is a value channel. Let's go to the daily of LSK BTC here. Let's just pull up the chart with no other indicators. This is a value channel of LSK BTC on the daily. This value channel has been drawn on LSK. I've been trading this value channel since this bottom and since this top here. So right here. This huge move did surprise me. But I've been trading LSK since this move. So that means since February 1st, I've had a value channel like this on LSK to trade these moves. And you'll see almost every supply and demand zone has some price action that moves in some way or another to the next supply and demand zone. For those that are in the training or understand, then this is making sense. But you'll see that this supply and demand zone here was rejected. It moved to the next supply and demand zone. This one here almost moved up, but it was rejected to the upside. It moved down, and then it moved through, and then it eventually moved down. This supply and demand zone was tested. It moved down to this supply and demand zone. This supply and demand zone was tested. It moved down to this supply and demand zone. So I'm sharing this because this is a trade system, and this is how I knew to trade LSK here, because it hit. Here I thought I missed the trade here on these days here because it didn't quite hit the bottom of this supply and demand zone. But what do we see here? We see rejection on the supply and demand zone. And if you watch the recent video that I released about getting confirmation of supply and demand zone, you know in this range here, there's confirmation. Right here, there's confirmation, regardless of what Bitcoin is doing. Obviously, if Bitcoin tanked, this would have tanked. But that's part of understanding the relationship. But we see here, in this range here, there's supply and demand zone confirmation here on this trade. And you'd be in this trade and you'd know exactly where to put your stop. So there's supply and demand zone confirmation. And you would have either, depends on what the trade was, you would have either got out at right here at 30%, or you'd still be in this trade right here, putting maybe your stop here or well below that. And you either would have got out at, I would hope that if it went up 60%, you would have got out of this trade, because when things move 60% in Bitcoin or in the alt market, they're going to retrace. So you either got out here below this supply and demand zone, or you obviously got out here, right? Notice how it hit. I can't stress this enough. Look at this. See that rejection there, that supply and demand zone? Let me scroll in just to make that very clear. See that rejection there? I'm not, this is why I have conviction to trade this system, is because, you know, when I did take an exit at 30%, I didn't go to this next supply and demand zone just because I wasn't sure with Bitcoin. I'm not sure with it, but it continued. Here, this is clear, entry, exit here, but you'll see the next supply and demand zone here. It bounced right off that supply and demand zone. So what are you waiting for now? Well, you're waiting for this supply and demand zone. You're waiting for confirmation to either maybe re-enter the trade or wait for it to hit the next level of the supply and demand zone again. Retrace back and maybe retest it. So, but when you're making this decision, when you're looking at this the supply and demand zone here, you're keeping in mind your predictive analysis of where Bitcoin is. This is what's really important, and it's I don't hesitate. I'm not saying it's easy. So if it was easy, everybody in this alt market or trading would be making capital. They'd be pulling capital from the market. what I've outlined here in just LSK, and I'll show another chart here, is how I traded LSK with conviction. I traded LSK with conviction because I got my confirmation, I put my exit, I put my stop loss where it needed to be, 5%, which was the obvious place to put a stop loss, so I was a little concerned there. And I got an exit. I traded this trade with conviction. Also understanding that Bitcoin might be in a range. So when I mentioned this, everything that I feel like I'm not being very pointed with the alt question, but it really does come down to you can do the same thing in the alt market too. This is the other thing. The same thing that I talked about Bitcoin. Well, let's look at the daily. If you're interested in LSK and it's something you want to trade, where is it going to close today? Where is it going to open today? It's going to close here. I always have a hard time finding the one thing I want to use there. It's going to close here. So it's going to continue down and it's going to close in this supply and demand zone. That's my prediction. What do? Well, it's 1832. So at the end of the day, or tomorrow, or over the weekend, I can look and see whether or not I was right. You can do this chart by chart. You can do this chart by chart and check your trade system. You also notice, if we just look at this, if we say this range, well, this is right near some moving averages. There's some moving averages right here. The 21, so we're saying that it's going to hit the 21, bounce off the 21, and it's going to close in this range. That's my prediction on LSK. Based on my knowledge of where BTC is going to close, and then based on this. Let's look at another chart of something else that has moved, something else that I've traded as well. So BQX has moved, BTC, and BQX does this. Now, I don't know what I have drawn here. That's weird. So let's draw a value channel here on BQX. Let's go to the weekly. So you'll notice I'm drawing the value channels off the weekly now, not the daily. And let's do a value channel here on BQX. We'll just go from this high here, even though it's not super reliable. Actually, let's do this. I don't like that high, that's why. There we go. Oh, that's right. This is the weekly. All right, so that's why. Okay. I don't know why it's not showing the lines. Let's go to the daily. I know there's a little bit of dead air here, but I'll just keep it in. All right. So let's go to the 1 hour. Let's look at this as well. Now, we've already said that Bitcoin was in a actual range. Now, one thing is that this actually went below a supply and demand zone, or the value channel. So you're seeing some of these altcoins do that. So there's a couple different ways you can do that. You could then start here, and then we can go to the 1 hour time frame. And we see that we have a supply and demand zone that was broken here. If we use the GAN tool, this is something I'll do a video on as well. You can create a sub value channel. So here, and if we look at BQX, we notice that at the half, remember in a value channel, you have supply and demand zones in the middle, the 75% and the 25%. Notice here in the middle, it got rejected. And then this was your entry signal here to trade this to the next level. So you'll see here, this is an indecisive entry signal, especially on the 1 hour. So it probably still has room to go because that's how the way BQX typically moves. But this would be another example of, as we're looking at this, keep it in mind. I'm sharing this just because this is I'm answering the person that asked the question, but I'm also I'm being mindful of someone that's not in the training and that is not hasn't followed all of my videos or it doesn't have the foundational training that I have in my training. What I see here and what I've drawn here would have given me confidence, conviction to make this trade here at a middle of a value channel. I would have done a reduced position for my risk management, but it would have given me confidence. Let's look at something else that has moved. All right, ZIL has moved. So let's look at ZIL, BTC. One of the things you notice, I don't have many value channels on many of these things because I went through a back testing phase, and I do on this one here, but let's remove all those. So ZIL, a lot of these are bottoming out. So you're just seeing the bottoms at a bottom of value channels. So there's going to be a move from a bottom of a value channel typically, and that's what we're seeing. Let's see if we can see another one. I don't want to give another example of like a bottom. That's the only thing. So here, weekly, daily. So frustrating that these charts don't show nice. There we go. Is this another bottoming out too? We're seeing this a lot in the market. Another bottoming out. So this is another bottoming out. Let's see if I can find something. I'll pause and see if I can find something that's not bottoming out. All right, I found BAT. So it hasn't hit its bottom, but it did test this. It did double bottom on this range here, the 25% range. And for those in Discord, you know I trade BAT. That's something that I'm looking for long-term hold and then also trading. Let's go to that day and let's just look at that. Look at that move down. So look at that move down. That's a heavy rejection of that range. I don't know if I would have entered there. That wouldn't have fit my trade system. But what do we know from this time frame? Well, we know, I'm going to get back to correlating this to Bitcoin. We know that Bitcoin was in our range based on our analysis. That's what we looked at. That's how we analyzed price. So when Bitcoin was in that range, we then look and say, where are the alt markets at that we're interested in trading, that pop up in our scanners? This one, BAT, hit a major bottom, and then it actually started going to a next supply and demand zone. And here, this wasn't quite an entry signal, but here was the entry signal. So your next range here was an entry signal. And it did test this range again, so you had another opportunity, and now it's continued to move. So you're still in this trade. The other thing to keep in mind is that each chart has its own personality. I've said this before, and I've said it throughout the training, but you notice the value channels on this chart are a lot smaller. So this chart here, it might break through 2 or 3 value channels on a move. This is one move. That's one move. This is one move. This is one move. So that's a 30% move. Now, what do we say whenever something in crypto moves 30%? Look for the retracement. So we should look for the retracement. That might not come quite yet because there's a little bit of exuberance in the market. So this might continue through the weekend. So this is where this is another good understanding. Okay, let's recap what the market has gone through. This is what you need to keep in mind when you're trading alts, because you have to be able to be good at reading the market. The other thing that I talk about often is that you need to be able to see the pivots in the market quick in the crypto market, because they move quick, they change quick. So you've got to be able to think in that level, in that time frame. That you've got to adjust your mind to think in that time frame. So let's game theory this out a little bit. Let's say Bitcoin closes where we said it was going to close up here, or it closes just below the supply and demand zone. What does that make people feel over the weekend that want to trade over the weekend in Asia and in the US, the Americas, and everything else. What does it make people feel? Well, it makes people feel that it's holding up. It hasn't broke 6,000. 5,800 is probably going to hold up. So think like a goldfish trader. This is the one way to think about it. Think like a goldfish trader. And I'm not saying that you should think like this, but this is one way. If you listen to my other video that I did previously about building empathy in the market, this is where it becomes important. Build empathy in the market. But think simply. Look, 5,800 has been rejected all week. This range has been rejected all week, and it's starting to move up. I'm feeling good. I made a good choice investing in Bitcoin. Now maybe I should go look at the alt markets, because what did they experience the last 2 days? If this continues, if we look at Binance right now, what are we seeing? Well, Nano, look at these movements. We're seeing some double-digit movements. Everything's green. Well, not everything, but everything's close to green, except for a few things. So things are moving. So this is where you have to be mindful at this given time, is understanding game theory out. If Bitcoin closes here, what does that give? What confidence does that give to the alt market? What expectation does that give to the alt market? Going into the weekend, you're looking for two things. A stability of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, it'd be good if it closes a little bit higher. That gives people more confidence. If it closes in this range, what you're looking for when you're trading something is reinforcement of the psychological nature that the world is not coming to an end. And that support is holding up, is that the supply and demand zones are holding up. And so you're looking for that. The first thing you're looking for if you're going to trade this weekend or trade in any time like this where things have really moved. Things have really moved over the last couple days for some things. And they've hit some bottoms and they've really started to bounce back from that. So what you're looking for are supply and demand zones holding up. The other thing that you're looking for, and this is where you want to use the market empathy that I covered in the other video, is that where are people taking profits? And you also want to be mindful of is Bitcoin, if Bitcoin takes a major dump here and dips, where does the price of this asset end up? If Bitcoin drops 12%, does this asset close down below here? Does it close in this supply and demand zone here? Does it close in this supply and demand zone here? So when you're trading these things, what you're looking for over the weekend, and this is just to get very specific, I probably will be trading this weekend in addition to doing more training content. But as I'm trading this weekend, what I'm looking for, do the supply and demand zones hold up? And then where are people taking profits? Someone that entered down here, a swing trader, have they taken profits already? So if they entered down here, have they taken profits? They're getting close, a 30% move. Remember in crypto, what I've said is that if it moves 30%, there's a retracement. So from here to here, that's 30%. There's a retracement. There's your retracement right here. So it's actually further down. There's your retracement here. But that's part of it is a Bitcoin move. So here, if we take the low here, it's moved 40%. Here, it's moved 30%. Does that mean that it can't move another 30%? No. In exuberant times, this is another thing to look at in the chart. And I've mentioned this before. And actually, let's go to the daily. In exuberant times, are there times when it moves quite a bit on the daily? Here's a daily move right here where it moved 30% in just one day. Now, you also want to look at the chart and just get a general feel. This is where you can look at this and say, well, if it does get exuberant, here's 1 day, 2 days of movement here. And we'll see from this low here, it did move a couple days, but there's a time where it actually moved 1, 2, had a retracement day, and then it just jumped from here. So this is possible. So within this psychology of this chart, it's possible. This is where you'd want to go and look at this, and let's say I want to trade this over the next couple days, is okay, does it have room to go in this next day? And it's already been rejected on the daily. As we can see, it's already been rejected so far. Does it have room to go? Where is it going to close on the day? And then if this trend continues, so if this upward trend continues here, where does this upward trend, let me remove this, where does it stop? And where do I want to take my exit? And how do I look at that? So here on 18, so April 18th is a big move day. So let's go here and let's go to the April 18th here. And this is where, look, no one said stuff is supposed to be easy and you're supposed to just figure this stuff out. But this is where you do the effort and the focus like this, it becomes easier and easier as you do it. So this is where you want to look at and see the psychology of the movement of what happened here. And just see if you can, now something happened in this day. Something, because you can see the volume here and then just the volume ticked up. So something happened in this day that made it move like this. So you might not be able to learn much from this type of move. And this is where you would put into your analysis of this, well, this is news broke here or something happened with BAT that made it move like this and made it make this parabolic move. So, and then the value held up. So you'll see what you'd like to see in something like this is that the value that it remained to hold up. So that's a good move. What you're looking for actually is something a little bit different. And I intentionally keep this stuff in these videos instead of just being perfect all the time and saying this is exactly where I'd look, because I always want to highlight that trading is messy. And the one thing I heard someone say this, and I don't remember who said this, but they said something along the lines is trading is the one thing you can do a lot of work in a given day and then you could still lose money. You don't typically go to a job, and if you put in your hours, you're going to get paid. Regardless if the business lost money or you didn't do a good job, you're still going to get paid because that's how it typically works. In trading, you can do a lot of work analyzing something and still lose money. And there's also a bias in trading with when you do a lot of work analyzing something that you should trade that. I might spend the next half hour looking at BAT here, and as I look at BAT for the next half hour, I have a bias then to then want to trade it because of the time. I don't want to have wasted my time. You need to fight that as much as you possibly can. Just because you analyze something and you spent time with it doesn't mean that it still makes sense. You've got to be able to divorce yourself from that actual time that you spent and look at the market from that perspective. But it can be helpful then to dive in here, and let's look at this day here, 13 July. And let's see if we can see some price movements there in that day and see if we can correlate it back. So it's here in this day here. In Bitcoin, this blue line here is Bitcoin. You can see it dipped here and then it hit a channel and then it started rising. And then we see BAT did the same thing. But you'll notice with BAT, sometimes it goes through, we see this a couple times, it goes through these big moves where it's a 17% move in 1 hour. That'd be great to catch. So that's where you'd look at some of this and you'd say, can I see a trend? Do I see a trend? We do see some supply if we go to the 2-hour time frame here. I do see a couple things of supply drying up. So there's a couple indicators right here of supply drying up. And we don't even have a value channel on here or anything else, but we can kind of see a couple indicators. In addition to moving averages and everything else, we can see a couple indicators right now that it might be looking to move. So if you see this a couple times in the BAT chart, this is where, as we go to the current time frame and we look at the same thing, is do we see these indications? Do we see this same type of move? So will this continue? And for that to continue, we would expect to see a similar type of pattern potentially. And that pattern would be if I were to just briefly go over what you would look for potentially, is your entry might be down here. Your entry probably is right here. Your entry for that type of move is probably right here. It's a break of this with a dry up of supply before that. So a dry up of supply before that, and then an entry on a confirmation of a value channel break would probably be your entry. Is probably where if this trade were to remember rhyme, not repeat but rhyme. So this type of move that sometimes BAT likes to do, that we've seen here in this chart, if it does this type of move here, these type of moves, well, this is a different one, but this is where we would look at that and say, okay, do we see signs of supply drying up? But all of this is predicated. What is this predicated on? And this is a good place to end the video, which is it's predicated on everything we covered in the beginning and everything we've talked about up until now. We know the historical nature of where Bitcoin has been this week. We have our predictive price analysis. We've went through and we've looked at Bitcoin, and we see right now it's crossed above 6,500. So I think where I said is that after looking at it, my final assessment was 66 to 6,500. If it hits that, did my analysis hold up? And then I want to go back to the chart and look and say, how is the chart responding to that value of Bitcoin holding up? So Bitcoin's value held up. My analysis of where Bitcoin price analysis or price action would end up is right. All right, so what factors or what other proof do I see? And this comes down to all the other foundational stuff that we cover in the training, which is volume, stopping volume, follow through, trend analysis, everything, all that other stuff we talk about. And value channels and everything else, is it holding up? And then looking at the market from multiple angles, and I know it sounds like a lot, but this is the, here's the thing. There is no simple trading method. If there was a simple trading method, then you'd be able to just create bots and trading bots and just trade those, and then it would be profitable all the time. The trading method that works is developing you as a intuitive trader based on a trading system that you trade with conviction. That's what works. So when you're looking at, we're taking all the knowledge that I've talked about in this video and where Bitcoin's at. If it trades in that range and I go and trade BAT over the weekend, what am I consistently keeping in mind? How much more does it have to move? What is the proof that it's moving that? What is the proof that it might go down? What you're looking at that, you're really, and I'll have another video on binary decision making going forward, but really you're looking at a binary decision making. It's either yes or no, really. It's not maybe in the middle. Everything is where is price likely to stop? If price is likely to stop here and it doesn't stop here, where is it likely to stop next? Where is it likely to reverse? And what indication do I see in my trade system that backs that up? The other thing to keep in mind is that, when am I wrong? If this comes back to looking at the market from a different perspective, which is, if I did enter a trade right now, let's say everything in my trade system says enter this trade. Let's say I entered down here. So I did enter this trade. And let's say that I put in a stop loss below the next value channel. So it's a longer term trade, and I'm looking for obviously a risk reward of a little bit higher. So I'm looking for right around 36%, and I've got a 12% risk on this, a little bit less than 12 or more than 12%. Let's say that's where I'm looking to do this trade right now. As it approaches each individual zone, it should be a binary decision. So as it approaches, this is where the binary decision involves Bitcoin as well. And this is the hardest thing, I think, for a lot of people in trading the alt market, is It's easy in a forex market. It's not easy, but in a forex market, there's not this overall. There is this overall thing, which is the governments and the market makers and everything else that do move the markets. But the difference is that Bitcoin is so volatile and it affects the alt markets. You have to always know about Bitcoin. You have to always know about it. So when you're trading the alts and you're looking at this, at every supply and demand zone, as this trade goes in my favor and I hit here, let's say I'm up 7% and it hits a supply and demand zone, I need to do an assessment of Bitcoin. And I need to look at Bitcoin and I need to understand, where is Bitcoin at? Is it meeting the expectations of the market? Is it in a range? What happens if Bitcoin dips? Once again, if it's in the supply and demand zone, if Bitcoin dips, what happens then? So maybe as it moves up here, maybe I move my stop up to this supply and demand zone. So I reduce my risk. So maybe I do that. Now let's say it hits the middle of this supply and demand zone, and then it just kind of trades sideways for a little bit. Maybe it's the middle of the morning, and maybe the Asian market isn't up or something like that, right? So you just look at the time. This is the other way that you need to look at this stuff. Understand the time of the world, everything else. You also want to keep in mind other support and resistance. Remember, you as an expert trader, as part of my training, you're using an advanced form of support and resistance. The support and resistance that you're using is an advanced form, is I don't have to say in my opinion, but in my opinion, is a much more reliable form of support and resistance. The typical trader is using standard support and resistance, meaning that they're looking at this and they're saying right here that this is a resistance zone. That's not a resistance zone. It is standard support and resistance. It is a resistance zone. But in the reality of this price action of this chart, it's not. But this is a resistance zone. This too. This is a resistance zone. It's not a resistance zone. It is. Now this is where I'm going to double speak, but if I keep saying if you're in the training and you've watched a lot of my videos, I double speak because a lot of times you have to keep in mind what other traders in the market believe. Other traders in the market believe in support and resistance. And yes, it does hold up a lot, but a lot of times it's not as reliable it's not reliable enough to trade, put it that way. It doesn't have a high enough probability for me to trade it. So, but you know, other traders look at this as resistance. You know that other traders look at this range here as resistance. That just happens to line up with a supply and demand zone. Here does not align with a supply and demand zone. So while other traders will look at it as resistance, and it does stop in this range here, you as a more advanced technical analysis trader and trading a far superior system, you will look at that in a different way and realize that this isn't true resistance. You would expect a slowdown, but your true resistance is this supply and demand zone, which it's getting close there. So you might look at that and say, well, it's going to get rejected at this one, but you're going to look at it from a different perspective. Same with as you're looking at your exit. If you're looking at here, your exit is here. Now, I did say before it was 30%, but your exit is here, below the supply and demand zone. It's not up here trying to maximize the trade. And this is where most people would fail as well, and it might hit there, but most people using standard support and resistance is going to say, well, this is support and resistance. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be really smart, and I'm going to put my exit just below here, and it might hit there. It's a higher risk trade. You know what's the better risk trade? The higher probability is here. If you're targeting this and all the fundamentals line up, here is better. Below a supply and demand zone, knowing that it's most likely going to test the supply and demand zone. Below here, below another support or another resistance point that other traders are going to use. Also correlating back every supply and demand zone that is hit. You're correlating back the fundamental analysis of where Bitcoin is in the psychology of Bitcoin, and then gaming out what happens if Bitcoin dips. So, and I'm making this longer, but I tend to do that. I apologize. I don't know if I need to apologize, but I tend to, if you're still watching this, then I don't need to apologize. But if it hits this supply and demand zone here, and Bitcoin is up here in this range, right around 6,800, you need to then game out. If Bitcoin drops below this supply and demand zone here, where does this go? Does this go to this next supply and demand zone? And if it does, and you did do this trade here, I believe it was here, maybe here. I don't exactly remember where, but here. And you did this trade, and it's up to this point right here, and then you're projecting that it might retrace back here, if not further, on a pullback, then maybe what you do is then you just move up your stop to like a trailing stop. So you move up your stop loss to a trailing stop, or you say the risk is too great because I don't know, and maybe you're not tied to your computer, you can't do a trailing stop or anything else, and maybe you just take an exit right there just because you say the risk is too great. Or you just say, look, I take the exit right here, right in this range. This is where when you're in a trade, and when you're in any trade in the alt, it's not in any way divorced from what's happening in Bitcoin. And it's not, and you have to always have that in your mind as Bitcoin, as you're in that trade. As it's hitting as it's hitting the next way. Let's go to the downside too. Let's say that I entered this trade here. Let's say I entered, well, I would be out of this trade, but let's say I entered this trade here. And as I entered this trade, well, you'll see Bitcoin rise here. But let's say I entered here for whatever reason, or I entered here, and I was watching the trade in this hour right here. In this hour right here, I was watching the trade. So I entered right here on the value channel for some reason. Let's say I did right here. And then the next hour it declined. And you'll see Bitcoin started to decline here. And then the next hour it started declining as well again. But you'll notice with the price action, if we just get into price action reading here, and I know I'm covering a lot of different things, but if we get into the price action, it got rejected to the middle of this candle here. And this candle did engulf these last couple moves. So you're looking at context. It's beyond this. Also, if we look at another couple things, it's moving across moving averages, above moving averages. So it's in there. It's almost in a clear uptrend, just on a mini uptrend. Once again, a mini uptrend. I'm not saying huge, but at that time when you were watching it, it was in an uptrend. So it looked like it was in a reversal uptrend because you were watching it from that point here. So you would have looked at this and said, well, it's in a mini uptrend. So if you just do simple, a simple diagonal value channel here, you would say, and we'll just do a simple value channel here, just the bottom. Well, if it breaks this trend line here at the bottom of what would be a value channel going in the diagonal way, and it didn't, then there'd be no reason to get out of that trade. And you'll also see what happened. This blue line right here is Bitcoin. Bitcoin continued to move up. So you would be, if you entered the trade at this point here, and it went in your here, and then it immediately went against you, and then Bitcoin dipped a little bit, you might be a little concerned. But you would have this diagonal value channel here that would be basically a trend line. And you would say, well, if it breaks this trend line here and it closes below this trend line, then I was obviously wrong. If Bitcoin follows through. But what did Bitcoin do? Bitcoin here at that same time frame started to move. It started to make a pretty good move here. So then you would be looking for in this alt, is the alt respecting that? Is it slowing down? And it didn't break, it never broke this actual trend line here until this hour right here. Well, it did start to break it here. But then you would still say, well, it's still in an uptrend. It's just a smaller uptrend. So we look at this. It's just in a smaller uptrend right now as we look at this. But you might look at this and say there was never a reason to get out of this trade given the trend that it's in, given the uptrend that it's in, given the price action that I see, and given the movement of Bitcoin, that it's in a channel. So I know I'm throwing a lot of concepts here. I did in this video. And well, you know, one of the great things about doing some of these videos I'll share is that because I have so much of the foundational stuff in my training that I can cover a broad range of things in one video and dive into a subject like this. And I don't have to cover each individual thing because I have those sections in my training. So I have the sections on reading price action, on value channels, on all the other stuff that we covered. I have those sections. So putting it all together is the messy part, but that's part of your trade system. So that's all for this video. I know I went quite a bit longer than I anticipated. I do hope that you found value in the video. You will find links to tools that I use down below. If you're interested in the training, you'll find a link to my website down below, as well as link to the Discord. You can direct message me and learn how to get started. Definitely subscribe here on YouTube if you have not subscribed yet. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.